My God, what's happening to me?
It happens all the time. Just relax. Wait till I start.
Hello, dear audience. Welcome to the UM6P studio during the UM6P Science Week. The theme this year is complexity. I am Muamuddin, and today I'll be having an interview with the Professor David NAPIER. Professor, welcome among us and thank you for accepting our invitation. The audience would love to know more about you and your area of expertise, so the floor is yours to talk about it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm David Napier. I'm Professor of Medical Anthropology at University College London. I also direct their Science, Medicine and Society Network. The focus of the network is to deal with and to study new and emerging problems that are not answered with one particular discipline. So, for example, we will put together a group of people to study a topic that requires input from multiple fields. And it's not simply a question of gaining insight from those individual fields. It's more a question of understanding how the problem itself is impacted by many domains. So, for example, in my case, in the case of healthcare, understanding healthcare and understanding human behavior, it's really quite important to realize that the things that mediate our ability to live healthy lives are often not things that we would think of as specifically medical, but for example, as through COVID-19, we know had an enormous impact on our health behaviors and our health outcomes.
Okay, so if we take Africa as an example, how can this continent actually benefit from complexity, not only in terms of medical anthropology or food security, but in all areas of research and work? How can it happen?
Well, the first thing we have to realize is that those risk factors are complex. It doesn't do any good to look at the effect of smoking on cancer. This is much more complex. You have to understand all of those things because they fuel one another, don't they?
Yes.
Right? So if you don't have a car, you're not going to get the food that's not going to make you see what I'm saying? Okay. So each one, so they compound one another. And what happens is eventually they compound one another so much that you are incapable of being the advocate for your own health.
Yes.
Okay? And we all know this. We all know this. On any given day, you get up in the morning and you have someone sick at your house, so you can't go to work. And because you can't go to work, you can't make the money you need to do this. And because you can't do that. So what happens is that we all know being vulnerable is not a stigma. You can be very well off and you can still have that extra thing happen. And sometimes it's only short term and that's okay. The next day you figure out how to deal with it. But for some people who are really struggling, that can become a chronic problem. And it manifests itself locally. The problems of transportation here are not the same as in Marrakesh, right? Yeah. So when you think about that, you realize that if you want to actually enhance a person's ability to manage their health outcome, you need to understand how those drivers of risk compound one another in real time in a real location. That's a complex challenge.
As you know, youth are the leader of the future in the whole world. And Africa is the topic of every debate as it has a great and high potential to be the leader continent in the future. How can African youth contribute in making Africa become the leader continent?
Okay, I can address that easily. First of all, I'm not the leader, you are. Okay?
Thank you.
The future is yours more than it is mine.
I agree.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that your question is excellent because we have to acknowledge the fact that it's not appropriate to make expectations on populations that are not feasible. If you have a problem and we're talking about your problem, or if I have a problem and we're talking about my problem, in order to address that, the first thing we have to think about is I have to think about options that are real to me that I haven't thought about. They have to be real options. They can't be talking about something that you know is never going to happen. You have to give people concrete things that actually will allow them to move from not having that agency to having that agency. That one little thing might make a big difference. So I'll give you an example. In the United States, in Houston, Texas, where we've done vulnerability assessments for diabetes. During the COVID outbreak, they had a very difficult time getting people to take their vaccines. And you think, oh, it's either they don't trust the government, it's vaccine hesitancy, or whatever. You make assumptions, don't you? So what the Department of Health did, because they understood some of the mechanics of this complex nature that we're talking about, to get to complexity, at the local level with young people, they went out into the communities and they said to people, if you come and take your vaccine, we give you money, $100, a lot of money for the first one, and $50 for the booster, right? Now you assume, and I assume, the reason people are doing that is what? They want the money. They'll come because they need the money, right?
Obviously.
Yeah. No, it's not true. Because what they found was that most of the people who actually, what they did with that money, they paid for someone to look after their children so they could go get the vaccine they wanted to get for 3 weeks. All right? Now, when you think about it at that level, you realize what you can do is the challenge here. It's a challenge between the assumptions of the policymakers and our assumptions and what's actually going on. What do we understand about vulnerability and how it functions in real time? So how do we bridge the space between what the government wants to do and what's happening locally? How do we understand that? And then how do we understand at local level, what are the tipping points that allow people to feel hopeful about the future and actually to engage with you in something that's productive?
My last question would be, what are your thoughts about the future of Africa in general?
Immense possibility. Yeah, immense possibility. And I think this is especially true because the ability to engage another person in a social space is the best indicator of a person's ability to be resilient. And I think this is shown over and over and over again. I wrote a piece for a magazine called Aeon. It's a research magazine, and the title of the piece was "Safety is Fatal." It was very provocative, because our tendency when these things happen is to withdraw, right? We withdraw socially, but that works for a very short period of time. But as you withdraw, you lose. As we say, you don't know what you do not know. Okay, you don't know it because you've removed yourself from that level of social engagement. And of course, if there's a major threat, you have to do that. I'm not minimizing the threat of COVID-19, but what I'm saying is, never forget that when you close those doors, you can't see what's on the other side.
That's true, actually.
We have to take risks, because this is where we find the common ground, is in you're sitting down and talking to me, and my trying to figure out what it is that we share in common.
Yes. So, Professor David Napier, thank you so much for being here again. It was such fruitful conversation. I learned a lot from you, and I would like to thank you again for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And see you soon, dear audience.